Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this December 29th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening, Monday through Friday, from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific Time. They also play the show at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, and if you can't get it there, go to my long-standing website at arcticbeacon.com, and you can get shows going back over a decade regarding what I call the Vatican-led New World Order, all its ramifications, and all its evil tentacles stretching all across this great world of ours. Okay, I usually start the show off with a Jesuit quote, but today the whole show's about the Jesuits and the Vatican, and specifically about Israel. And yesterday, an unprecedented thing happened in relations between our country and Israel. And first of all, let me say this. Obama gave a parting shot over the bow in his last few days as president. And I've always said this, that Obama's term in office can be summed up in 6 words. Praise the Muslims, ignore Christianity, and blame the Jews. And yesterday was a perfect example when the United Nations Security Council has set forth a plan to tell the world that Israel is at fault for the war in the Middle East over Palestine and the sacred ground in Israel. They claimed that, and the United States did not veto this. In fact, they were behind it. And what they did is they stabbed Israel in the back, outwardly, and said that the settlements in the West Bank, even including the Wailing Wall, don't belong to Israel, and they must cease immediately. Netanyahu, who leads Israel right now, came out strongly opposed to it. Trump says, stay strong, Israel. You only have 23 days left, and I'll be there to help you. So here we have an unprecedented move that's going to be really difficult to overturn in the Security Council because China, Russia, they can veto it. And so there's calling, many pundits now are calling to remove the United Nations from, one said to take that building, put it in the East River, and then have some country in the some other country take it away and put it in their country. Others on Capitol Hill right now are calling for defunding the United Nations. And so we have a move here unprecedented. And really, the United Nations, if you look at it, has always supported terrorist organizations, dictators. They ignore the Christian genocide going on. They've always been opposed to Israel and want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And the United States has stood strong behind Israel. Now we have a complete turnaround. And then John Kerry, our Secretary of State, gave an unbelievable speech. I've never heard anything like it. But when we look at the outward things going on, that's not even half the story, folks. And the real story is very simple. I'm a simple guy. And you can look at this and say it's complicated and people can't understand it, but I make it real simple. The Vatican and the Jesuits from Georgetown control our foreign and domestic policy. This speech was handed to Kerry and to Obama for a reason. Now, most Americans have no idea that our Congress, that our leadership, that our presidents, our executive branch are all controlled, selected, and they have a goal. And the goal is very important to the Vatican. They are controlling this. Now, years ago, I met a guy, the late Barry Chamish. And I have to admit that most of what I learned about Israel started with him. And let me explain. He wrote a book called Who Murdered Yitzhak Rabin? And you're probably asking who he is. If you've heard of Yitzhak Rabin. He was the leader of Israel for a time. He was murdered, and he wrote a book explaining why he was murdered. Now, I'm going to get to that in a minute. So what he stated was that he had learned as a journalist he was originally born in Canada, a Jew. He went to Israel, and let me just read you his bio. Barry was a good, I had him on my show so many times over a decade ago, and he really set me straight on what's going on in Israel. And basically let me just make it simple. The Knesset and the Israeli leaders are controlled by the Vatican as well. And the Jewish people are as ignorant of this as the American people. We're all being led by the nose. And Barry suffered greatly for his reporting in Israel. Now let me read you his bio. Barry was a Canadian-born journalist who immigrated to Israel, where he received an MA from Hebrew University. He served in the Israeli Defense Force, IDF, and participated in the 1982 Lebanon War. After the war, he ran a press service whose articles appeared in Billboard, The Hollywood Reporter, The Screen International. His reports have also appeared in The Atlantic, The New Republic, The New York Newsday, etc. However, once he started realizing, and this probably occurred right around 2001, this connection between the Vatican, and I remember talking to him about how he learned about it and how he was persecuted for it. In fact, he was almost killed in Israel, and he had to leave the country. And I picked up his story after a terrible traffic accident that was set up to, they did something to his car, and he almost died. He had to flee, went back to Canada, where he had a tough time getting back into his own country. And I covered in depth this trip he made and how he finally got to the United States and set up shop in a place called St. Augustine, Florida. Now, he appeared on my show many times and other radio shows, and I have to say I learned most of what really was going on in Israel from Barry, and was turned on to one of his partners named Joel Boehnerman, which I'm going to read a part of an article he wrote. And they set the record straight about the Oslo Accords, the Vatican's connection to the PLO, and really what was going on in Israel. Now, Barry, look, after he began to really concentrate on the Vatican and the Jesuit control, he was kind of, he wasn't given the chance to be on a big radio station. He wasn't given a chance to get his articles anymore in some of these bigger magazines. He had his own blog. You should go to it. It's barrychamish.com and read everything he's written about what's really going on behind the scenes. And you're going to be shocked to see that this all plays out also in Christian prophecy, in biblical prophecy. And so to make this story simple, like I always try to do, I think Barry is rolling over in his grave right now. I wish he was here, to be honest with you, to comment on what happened yesterday. And I'll do my best to put it into perspective. I don't think I have... Look, he's a wealth of knowledge. He spent his life trying to alert people and to alert fellow Jews of what really is going on and how the Pope is giving, still to this day, final marching orders to, in fact, he wrote an article back in, this was in 2014, when the Pope Francis visited Israel and met with Shimon Peres. And we're going to mention that. But let me just say this about Barry. He then, after, and look, I know this truth too. When you start talking about the Vatican the way I do, you have a limited chance of getting this story out. You can't get it out in the mainstream. Barry couldn't get it out in the mainstream news in Tel Aviv. And so basically resorted to his own website, his books. He's written many books. One of his best-selling ones was Who Murdered Yitzhak Rabin, and we'll get into that story briefly. I've covered it in the past on many of my other shows with Barry. So he ended up, guess where? On First Amendment Radio, right here. He had I believe, a weekly or a bi-weekly show until he recently passed away. And like I said, I wish he was here to comment on what happened in the United Nations Security Council and what Obama has done. It would be fascinating to listen to him. But we have to get some background on this. And so, who was Shimon Peres and Yitzhak Rabin? Okay, for all of us here in America who may not be up to speed on this, Shimon Peres was elected the Prime Minister of Israel under its National Unity Government in 1984. In 1994, he co-won believe it or not, you're going to see why I say that, a Nobel Peace Prize for negotiating the Oslo Accords. And this was along with Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. He was elected president of Israel in 2007 and retired from his role in 2014. Okay, like I said, I got to know Barry over the book he wrote called Who Murdered Yitzhak Rabin. And Barry had found out through his really good reporting that Yitzhak Rabin, had opposed Shimon Peres and his Vatican handover agenda. For that, Peres was given the go-ahead to organize his murder with Vatican oversight. That's it in a nutshell. Now, in one article that Barry wrote, so we have the Oslo Accords, which was a sham. It was never meant for peace. It was meant for Vatican takeover. And he asked the question and wrote an article in 1997, The Vatican's Jerusalem Agenda. And he said, he asked, did Shimon Peres make a deal with the Vatican? Now remember, Shimon Peres just left after the Pope visited in 2014 Israel, and that's an amazing story. He wrote a story in 2014 about that I'm looking at. It's too long right now to get into everything, so let me give you a background here to make it simple. Did Peres make a deal, and does he work with the Vatican? Of course he does. Does Obama work with the Vatican? Of course they do. Does Netanyahu work with them? Yes, he does. And the people in both Israel and America are blinded to this by the mainstream media, who never gives you the truth about really what's going on. And what happened yesterday is a perfect example of how they're setting up Israel for this Vatican takeover. Now, the question, he says, consider this evidence. On September 10th, in 1993, just 3 days before the signing of the Declaration of Principles in Washington, of the Oslo Accord, the Italian news magazine La Stampa reported that part of the peace deal was an unwritten understanding that the Vatican would receive political authority over the old city of Jerusalem by the end of the millennium. The newspaper reported that Shimon Peres had promised the Pope to hand over the holy sites of Jerusalem the previous May, and that Arafat had accepted the deal. Now, isn't that interesting? Let's move on. He said in March 1994, the Israeli news magazine Shishi published, and that's spelled S-H-I, published an interview with Mark Halter, a French intellectual and close friend of Shimon Peres. He said he delivered a letter from Peres to the Pope the previous May, within which Peres offered the Vatican hegemony over the old city of Jerusalem. The article detailed Peres's offer, which essentially turned Jerusalem into an international city overseen by the Vatican and the Holy See. In March of 1995, the radio station Arutz Shiva announced that it had seen a cable sent by the Israeli embassy in Rome to the foreign ministry in Jerusalem outlining the handover of the old city of Jerusalem to the Vatican. 2 days later, the magazine Haaretz published the cable on its front page. The foreign ministry explained that the cable was genuine, but someone had whited out the word not, i.e., we will not transfer authority to the Vatican. Incredibly, numerous rabbis who had canceled Passover meetings with Perez over the issue of the cable accepted the explanation and re-invited him to their homes. The foreign ministry's legal affairs spokesperson publicly complained that the various capitulations to the Vatican. She was immediately transferred to the post at the Israeli embassy in Nepal. Then we have this, and there's a number of things here. Jerusalem's late deputy mayor announced that he had received information that properties promised to the Vatican would be granted extraterritorial status. With all this in mind, how do we interpret the Vatican's current position in Jerusalem, he asks. Now, what's the current position? And he goes on to address that question. Now, what is the position today? It's getting interesting, and we're going to deal with that in a minute. Okay, as I learned from Barry, that Shimon Peres and the Israeli leadership to this day is in the pocket of the Vatican. And it goes way back to that Oslo Accord of 1993, which was never intended for a peace accord, but to really give Vatican control of these holy sites and to have Vatican control over Jerusalem, which they desperately want. And that has to do with a lot of end-time prophecy and what's going to unfold in the years to come. So, going back to Oslo, in 93, the Vatican, Barry just stated it outright. He just said the Oslo Accord was the Vatican Accord. And he asked the question, how did Vatican spy, at that time, current President Shimon Peres, view this peace? And he viewed it as many people who were opposed to this, to Peres, including Yitzhak Rabin, was opposed to this Vatican handover agenda. So that's really, in a nutshell, what was going on back then. Now, before we talk about the United Nations move yesterday and the Security Council's move against Israel yesterday, I'm going to call on Joel Boehnerman, who worked together with Barry, and he wrote an article years ago and asked this question. So what is the Vatican planning, and what can Israeli Jews do about it? And I'm going to also ask, what can Americans do about it? Because this is a huge story, folks. But he said this, he said, for centuries the Vatican has been pushing its, quote, replacement doctrine, which states that the Catholic Vatican Church has replaced Israel as the, quote, new Israel. The Roman Catholic Church wants Israel to lose sovereign control over the old city of Jerusalem so that, quote, the promise to the literal descendants of Abraham will be applied to the new Jerusalem. If Israel controls Jerusalem, it is evidence that Rome's claims are not legitimate and that the literal interpretations of the scriptures is correct. There is no place for the restoration of the nation of Israel in its theology. How can the Vatican claim to be the new Jerusalem and rightful heir to the kingdom of God and that city if the Jews control Jerusalem? That's the key here. How is the Vatican going to convince the world that their version of theology is correct? The Vatican is going to have everyone believe that, quote, this mysterious individual who will unite the faiths and appear in Jerusalem, which will be under the control and authority headed by the Vatican. That deal to have the Vatican come to Israel and take over these properties and to control and dominate the old city of Jerusalem already exists and has been fully documented and reported in the world's media. The end goal of the Vatican, says Boehnerman, is to seize control of the old city of Jerusalem out of the clutches of the state of Israel. To that end, they have a secret agreement with Israel. That's what Barry has talked about. That's why Yitzhak Rabin, who opposed it, was killed, to respect the extraterritorial claim to their physical presence in the city. In short, we have accepted the Vatican's rights to have little Vatican sovereign embassies throughout our eternal capital of Jerusalem. That same Vatican has committed itself in the public and in written agreement to ensure that the Palestinians have sovereignty over the city of Jerusalem. The public record shows a secret deal has already been conducted behind the backs of Israeli public, whereby the Vatican was promised to take over the old city. There is ample proof in the public record to prove that a secret deal was done with the Vatican by two Israeli government representatives, Yossi Beilin and Shimon Peres. As it was concocted covertly, it can't serve the Israeli public, but someone else. Thus, their agreements need to be made null and void. It doesn't matter if religious Jews or Israelis think that Catholic theology is strange-looking, extremely ritualistic. What matters is that all Israelis understand that the Vatican has a secret agenda, and Americans, and I'm going to add this, and you must understand their secret agenda, which includes stealing the old city of Jerusalem away from the Jews. That is what you need to know and understand. Unfortunately, this agenda is being carried out in secret, behind your back. Behind the backs of the American people, behind the backs of the Israelis. And that is why your people are ignorant of its true aims. The purpose is to warn you that these exact intentions of the Vatican, so that you will be informed about it. Why, and the media folks in our country, and I'm adding this, doesn't cover it. They don't cover it in Israel. And they give you a false narrative. This comes to relations with the Roman Vatican. Even the covert clauses of the Vatican Agreement, the exchange of ambassadors, and the opening of the Vatican archives to Israeli researchers have not been fulfilled by the Vatican. From an Israeli perspective, the fundamental agreement between the Holy See and the State of Israel has been a complete failure and should be immediately rescinded. Now, has that ever been done, folks? Of course not. And with a couple minutes here before the break, let me just add what happened yesterday, where the American government, acting on behalf of the Vatican, stabbed Israel in the back for a reason, so that in the end, the Vatican has total control over what they call an international city where the Muslims and the Jews can all worship. But yesterday's agreement stated that they no longer have authority even over the Wailing Wall, that it's not Jewish territory, and that that Israel must stop, building in parts of Jerusalem, stopping, and Kerry made it clear, the big problem is the settlements, when he ignored the outright terrorism that's going on from the Palestinians. Do you know that Palestinians are given money for every Jew they kill? Yes, they are soccer teams named after people who have killed Jews. They got a price on Jewish heads. They get monthly salaries if they go out and commit terror. Now, the United States ignored that and blamed everything on the Jews. That's why I said Obama's policies today are very simple. Praise the Muslims, ignore Christianity, and blame the Jews. Now, you might add, Trump came out opposed to this. Well, that's their Hegelian dialectic at work. They, of course, are going to get their synthesis, their endgame here. And this is just one step closer, folks, to what we're going to talk about in the second half hour, and that's prophecy.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal. And like I said, I wish that the late Barry Chamish was here to give you this analysis of this whole story I'm talking about what happened yesterday in the United Nations Security Council, Obama's shift, or so to speak, his constant contempt for Israel over his 8 years in the White House. And I know Barry would do a much more thorough job than me, so I'll just do my best. And I said I'd get to some prophecy regarding what's happening. I might not have time this half hour because I still wanted to really talk about what does the Vatican really want here. Now, it's very clear that the Vatican uses the United States government and the Israeli government to do their bidding. And in fact, Joel Boehnerman, who was a good friend, they worked together, Barry and Joel, said that most Israelis, and this is a quote, have probably never thought very much about the Roman Catholic Church. And I say that most Americans never give it a real thought when it's regarding this story. The Vatican thinks, they never give a big thought about what the Vatican thinks about the end days of theology. Jews themselves don't give much thought to what will happen when Gog and Magog take place, so look into that. Jews don't go in for anything the least bit next world, but instead are firmly planted in the here and now. Now, Americans are exactly the same way. But really, folks, when you think about it, it doesn't matter what we think or the Jews think, does it? It matters what the Vatican believes. And why it believes, and this is a quote from Boehnerman, that Judaism and modern Jewish thought pretty much just dismiss the basic tenets of Catholicism outright and doesn't even bother addressing the core questions of what is behind Catholic theological claims. So, what does the Vatican want? And in Boehnerman's article, he states it can't be that the Vatican is only interested in access to their holy sites in Jerusalem. We know the Vatican owns the Temple Mount. They already have that, as well as legal jurisdiction under Israeli law for their institutions and assets in Jerusalem, right? Also, when these holy sites were under the jurisdiction of the Jordanians from 1948 to 1967, no pope demanded the internationalization of Jerusalem. Look, I'm going to add this. The Oslo Accords were just a red herring, folks. There was much more behind it to get this Vatican control. And now what's happening in Kerry getting on and saying, no more building in the West Bank, these settlements must go, and if you don't stop there, there'll never be a two-state peace, the Palestinians and Israel. Well, that could be a smokescreen as well for the takeover here of Israel. And really, the Palestinian problem through Kerry and Obama was not even addressed in this speech. They forgot about all the terrorism. They forgot about Hamas. They forgot about the bounties that are put on Jewish heads. And they forgot about what even Palestine has said every step of the way when Israel has asked for peace. They have refused consistently over the years, going back from the late 40s on through the 90s, even to this day, and they have publicly stated that Israel must be wiped off the face of the earth. They will not accept an Israeli state in that part of the world. Now, why would our country stab Israel in the back when it's our only democratic ally in that region? Why? Because, like I said, Obama praises Muslims, ignores Christianity, and blames Jews. So look at his background, where he came from, where he was brought up. That was his heritage. And we foolishly, he was selected by the Jesuits for this reason. Now, Boehnerman goes on to say, so they're not only interested in these holy sites, it's something else, which the Vatican wants, he says. The Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican need to have a certain version of events be played out for them to stand in front of mankind and proclaim, our Messiah has returned. Of course, to the Jews, this Messiah will be a false one, as the first one was supposed to be to the Jews. But that doesn't matter. This is the goal of the Vatican, and this is what all Israelis need to worry about, and this is what all Americans need to worry about. A one-world religion control, using our government and the Israeli government and the governments of most of the Arab countries, or all of them, to reach this goal. They know this isn't the end of the story that the Jewish God had in mind, but doesn't mean they won't try and engineer their own ending to the story. So what if it is fraudulent? It doesn't matter, does it, he says? That is their game plan, and that is what matters. And that is what Israel, Jews, and Americans, I add, need to be better informed about. If we were informed about this sinister plot behind the scenes that the Vatican takes part in, and the Jesuit, maybe this stuff wouldn't happen. It is important for everyone to know what the Vatican has up its sleeve, because it directly relates to our existence and our future destiny, not only as an independent Jewish nation, but a world that is constantly at war. This is a very powerful force. This is scheming to get control of the old city of Jerusalem. So you better know why and how the Vatican intends to do this. Once you have all the facts, says Boehnerman, and the chronological record, you will be better informed to deal with this issue and of foreign control over Israel's political destiny. First, you have to realize that for centuries the Vatican has attempted to obtain control of Jerusalem, which started with the Crusades. For them to convince the world that the Messiah they put on the world stage is going to be accepted as genuine, They need to perform this play in the old city. The story of this production is that this Messiah will merge the three monotheistic religions, usher in peace and harmony in the world, and solve the Middle East conflict. The location for this production, says Bannerman, will be in none other than the old city of Jerusalem. So may I add, they have to take control. And I say this, folks, doesn't that fall in line with their plan of a one-world religion? To bring together Islam, Judaism, Christianity under their false Messiah and create what they call as harmony, but really was what is called destruction. And Bannerman goes on to say the so-called Messiah that will be proclaimed will be a false one, and it will insist that by having a world government, i.e. the United Nations, the world peace and harmony will be ushered in. This is a lie and a fraud. But never mind, in our world, reality isn't important. Wow. And folks, how many times have I said to you that when you wake up and step outside, you're in a fictional Jesuit world, and your reality isn't important anymore. Public perceptions, however, are important, says Bannerman, and the end result is the stripping of Israel's sovereignty as an independent nation, giving way to a regional bloc of nations in the Middle East. Israel will be pressured to accede to these demands by all world bodies and the superpowers on that claim that this is the only way to solve Middle East conflict. And look at what Kerry just said yesterday. It's exactly what he's doing. Now, he's going to have a fight. Now, let's go one step farther here, and maybe this analysis of mine will help. Maybe it won't. But let me give it a try. As we see what's unfolding in the world today, we're seeing the battle lines right now being drawn. If you agree that the idea the Jesuits have and what our world leaders have to destroy Christianity and Western civilization, the battle lines are being drawn. The United States now with Trump will oppose what Obama just did. Israel will oppose it. Japan is now in a conflict, is going to be in a will perhaps be united with us because they're going to be in a conflict with China over the South China Sea, and we're going to be against China on that. The situation between Russia and Ukraine and the Balkans and what's going on there is another powder keg. North Korea, another powder keg. So what's happening here is we're having an alignment. We also see Europe now fighting against this new world order. And they're being aligned, of course, with us. And this is going to be a powder keg somewhere. And the Vatican is in control of it all, just like they were in control with many of the other wars that have, our country has been at war all but 20 years of our existence, thanks to the Jesuits in the Vatican. Now, the end result, like Bannerman said, and back to Bannerman, is the stripping of Israel's sovereignty. Now, in order for this to happen, the Jews have to go along, and they will convince them that with the Messiah having appeared for the Jews, it is time to start rebuilding the third temple, what they call Solomon's Temple. This version of events is widely available through a simple search on the internet, and there are many Christian groups and organizations, the majority of which who are very pro-Israel, who don't buy into these beliefs and thus are against them. Bannerman says, look, I didn't come up with this theory. I'm just bringing it to the attention of the Israeli public. And in turn, me, your humble correspondent here, your humble correspondent, who says that? I don't even know why I said that. Bill O'Reilly says he's their humble correspondent. Yeah, he's a humble correspondent, all right. But anyway, I bring it to the attention of the American people. Make no mistake about it. The old city of Jerusalem, as well as most of the eastern half of the city, is what the Vatican is after. And, Kerry now says this settlement building must end in the West Bank. And my question is, why? Because, as Bannerman here, I'm going to quote him, and my dog Max is thirsty. And people always comment, why I hear your dog drinking water. He sounds like a horse, doesn't he? Yes. He does drink a lot of water. And the reason I have him with me is that he loves to be near me, and so does my other dog, Miss Moose, when I do my show, because they really are the most two intelligent dogs about the Vatican in this whole entire country. And they can't get enough of it. And they in turn tell all their dog friends about it. So we have a little bit of a movement going here with the animal kingdom. And Moose, my dog Max, and I'm not making light of what's happening in the world, but sometimes when it gets so serious, I have to do this. But Max says that in the animal kingdom, big dogs like him, he's a 100-pound Malamute, have been discriminated against. And he wants to be the first big dog president of the dog world. He says the little dogs have taken over and control. These little Shih Tzus and little Chihuahuas have taken control of the dog world, and he's fighting against them to get some peace and quiet in the world, he says. He says, who better than a big dog to control the animal kingdom and tell them about this evil Vatican? So anyway, here we go. So Bannerman asks, why is this going on in Jerusalem? Let's check the time here. So I'm getting carried away. Oh, we're only halfway through here. In the second half hour of the Investigative Journal. Give the show to your friends. And do me a favor, go to barrychamish.com, read about him. And I'm telling you something, I miss having him around. Especially when stories like this occur. What a wealth of information he was, and he was one of the true journalists that came over, that was persecuted for these views in Israel and came over and tried to tell the American people, and to his last days, he was doing it on First Amendment Radio. So you can get some of his old shows too there. And so people ask me, well, where do you go now? And, well, there's a guy that does he's an American, does something called Israeli News Live, and he's pretty good. You can go to some of his videos. Anyway, so Bannerman says, why do they want control? Because controlling, he says, the entire city of Jerusalem, and not just the church properties, and being able to build whatever they want on Mount Zion, is critical for the program they have planned to put into play in our capital city. The deal it had signed with Israel via Balin and Shimon Peres, in secret, without the approval of the Knesset, gives the church not only the extraterritorial status to their properties, which is what the bilateral agreement the Israeli government signed with the Vatican on December 30th, the Oslo Accords in 1993, but put into law, but of control over the entire city they want as custodians under UN presence. In this way, the Jews will give up control of that city to the Vatican. They'll give control to the Vatican, and to the Vatican the Israeli people would have a problem with. To the UN they would say, we had no choice. Now, he went on to give a chronology of events by the Vatican to displace Israel from the old city of Jerusalem. He started in 1991, and I'm going to go through a few of those for you, and they're quite interesting. But first, let me remind you of an article that Barry wrote back in 2001, and he said this. He said, there's no question whatsoever that the Vatican wants Israel off the Temple Mount and that our leadership is accommodating their desire. What I have not been able to pinpoint is why. However, material sent to me appears to answer the question. Now, he says, allow me to preface a few comments before I carry on. The vast majority of my ongoing readers are not really conspiratorial in their outlook. What attracted them to my list and to me and my books is that I solved the Rabin assassination to their satisfaction, and that I'm offering more likely explanations for Israel's suicide than they are getting from the mainstream media. That's how I got in touch with Barry. It took 5 years for me to finally instill the fact that the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR in New York, is Israel's #1 enemy. And despite pouring on the evidence time and time, there are still doubters who refuse to believe that the organization can have that much power. Every time I dig deep, I'm accusing of going too far, even of fantasizing imaginary foes. So what I'm going to do with the evidence sent to me is I have found that the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, whose members are known as Jesuits, of being the real power behind the CFR, and of being Israel and Judaism's most vicious and successful enemy. He says, my doubters are going to have a field day with this revelation, but I'm going ahead anyway, and the weight of the evidence is beyond merely compelling. Now, as I got to know Barry, we discussed many times the Jesuit connection, and he kept digging and really came up with the same conclusion that I came up with, that all roads lead to Rome. And Barry was very important to me because I was dealing more with this Vatican control of the United States and other parts of the world, and there was a gap with Israel, and he filled up that gap with a lot of interesting articles and information over the years that he brought to many people. And I hope that people go to look at some of his work. Now, he said this. He said he in fact gave a shout out to Tupper Saucy. He said a composer and writer who I greatly admired, Tupper Saucy, released a book called Rulers of Evil, which expanded on the thesis of Jesuit control of the American political system as receiving fine reviews. We have begun a correspondence, and I will receive his book. So anyway, he went on to read his book. We discussed it a number of times, and so goes the story. But I just wanted to bring that up before I went through some of the chronology of events that led up to what Kerry did yesterday, which is unbelievable. I don't have much time in this half hour, so I've got maybe 5 minutes. So let me see if I can just start. And maybe we'll finish this tomorrow and then get into some of the end-time prophecies that people have been talking about on the internet, Christian ministries, etc., and see how it jives with the information that I'm giving you today. Okay, I have only 5 minutes, so I'm going to have to make sure I don't go over time. Now, it starts out in 91. Boehnerman gave us a chronology here of why the Vatican wants to displace Israel from the Old City. Now, in October 91, the head of the World Jewish Congress, Edgar Brofman, is appointed head of the International Jewish Committee of Interreligious Affairs to conduct official contacts with the Vatican and the State of Israel. March 92, the Jerusalem Mayor Teddy Kollek says, quote, the Israeli government should meet the Vatican's demand to apply special status for Jerusalem. April 92, the Vatican announced that it favors a labor victory. In June 92, general elections in Israel. On April 15th, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, one of the highest-ranking diplomats at the Vatican, visits Israel for the first time, but only meets with Jerusalem Mayor Teddy Kollek. In June of 92, the story of the Catholic Church's attempt to abscond with the old city of Jerusalem from the Jews begins in July 92. According to the information on the Foreign Ministry website, literally from the moment the new Rabin-led Labor government took over from Yitzhak Shamir's defeated other party, secret talks with the Vatican and the State of Israel began. What precipitated these secret talks? Who arranged these talks? And why? Why were they kept secret from the Israeli public? What was the end result of these agreements? Where do they stand today? Their entire subject of Israel's bilateral relations with the Vatican is internationally kept locked away in secrecy. It is no wonder that nobody in Israel, and I may add America, knows much about the Israeli-American-Vatican relations, as it never, ever is reported in the Israeli press, and I might add, never reported in the American press. The official story of the origins of Israel's secret channel contracts between Berlin, negotiating team, and the Vatican comes about as a result of a personal aide to Deputy Foreign Minister Yossi Beilin, who knew someone who put him in touch with Father David Yeager. Father David Yeager was president of the Catholic Court in Austin, Texas, and was brought up as an Israeli Orthodox Jew who then converted to Catholicism and became a father, not something that has happened to many Israelis who grew up Orthodox. From there, which according to the information on the Israeli Foreign Ministry website was in July of 92, right after the new Rabin government took over power, nothing is known about the discussions until the agreement was signed in 93, the Oslo, yes, the agreement, in December 30th, 1993, the Oslo Accords. Nothing in the Israeli press, nothing in the American press about this. The info given on the actual agreement signed was very minimal and general in tone. There's probably one of the most important political contacts Israel has in the world's power structure, yet it isn't reported on the press. Thus, no Israelis know about it, no Americans know about it, and that is how it remains hidden. And what do I tell you about them? I mean, everything is hidden. We only have a minute here, so I'm going to have to stop there in June of 92. But I must add, this secret deal with Balin and Perez was personally authored. This was a control of the Vatican to take over Israel. Just like they worked behind the scenes in America to overthrow our country and Western civilization, folks. Get with it. This story yesterday is huge when you put all the pieces together. And we're going to continue with the story tomorrow on Friday. And like I said, email me if you are involved with a Christian ministry that talks about prophecy, relating it to this story. And my email is gregbeacon@gmail.com. And I'd love to hear from you, as there are many people out there who are dealing with what the Bible says about this and how it's all lining up. So that's an important aspect that we have to cover. And we will start on that tomorrow, Friday, on the Investigative Journal. Hope you enjoyed the show. See you tomorrow. Have a nice evening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.